They say if you hear a slow waltz echoing through the snow, run, but the Frostbite Bride is choosing her next guest. In the winter of 1893, the estate of the Krestov family stood like a stone skeleton buried in frost. Snow fell relentlessly over the rooftops, blanketing the twisted gargoyles that guarded the estate's iron gates. Deep within the Russian countryside, far from St. Petersburg's glittering streets, Krestov Manor had grown as cold as the hearts that once filled its ballroom. Locals feared it, avoided it. They spoke in hushed tones of the white lady who walked its frozen grounds, the one who left no footprints, only ice crystals and the scent of wilted lilies. They called her the Frostbite Bride. It began, as most tragedies do, a celebration. The manor had once pulsed with life. The scent of burning cypress, the clink of glasses, the dizzying violins of Tchaikovsky filled the grand ballroom. And at the center of it all had stood Anastasia Volkov, daughter of a once wealthy merchant, chosen by Lord Dmitri Krestov for marriage, not for love, but for debt, alliance, and the preservation of bloodlines. She was young, pure, beautiful, and tragically unaware that her wedding night would end in frost. The villagers remembered the wedding day. The blizzard had arrived like an omen. Snow smothered the roads, and even the local priest delayed his journey to the manor. Still, the ceremony went on. Anastasia was seen walking down the grand spiral staircase in her delicate white lace gown, her eyes wide and uncertain. The music never paused. The guests danced, drank, and vanished into rooms shrouded in velvet and vice. But not one soul stayed past midnight, not even her new husband. By morning, Anastasia was gone. Lord Dmitri claimed she had wandered into the storm, mad with fear. Others whispered she was locked outside, a punishment, a ritual, a Krestov tradition. Her body was never found, only a veil, frozen solid to the iron gate, glimmering like glass. 30 years later, in the same forgotten estate, Sofia Vetrov, a schoolteacher from Moscow, arrived after receiving a mysterious letter. You are the last blood tied to the Volkov line. Come to Krestov Manor. Your inheritance awaits. She traveled by sleigh, crossing barren forests and half-frozen rivers. The wind howled like wolves. The driver refused to go past the forest's edge. No one survives a night in there, he warned, not when the snow sings. But Sophia, curious, skeptical, and desperate to escape her crumbling life, stepped forward anyway, boots crunching into snow that seemed to whisper her name. Inside, Krestov Manor waited like a tomb dressed in wealth. Chandeliers hung like icicles. Portraits with rotted eyes stared from cracked golden frames. Yet a fire burned in the hearth, freshly lit, though no soul appeared to tend it. On the second floor, the bedroom doors were all open. All but one. Room number 7 was locked, and from behind it, Sophia swore she heard soft weeping. That night, she dreamt of a woman in a wedding dress walking through the halls, her face hidden by a long frost-covered veil, her feet never touching the ground, a frozen bouquet in her hand, and that music, a slow, haunting waltz played from nowhere. And Sophia awoke. The windows were open. Snow had crept into her bed, and on the glass, drawn in a thin line of ice crystals, were the words, "Do not dance with the dead." The morning brought no sun, only a sky as pale as bone, and a wind that scratched the windows like desperate fingernails. Sophia awoke shivering under heavy quilts, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The manor, though sealed from the outside, offered no warmth within. It breathed with an old chill, coldness that came not from nature, but memory. She rose and found her boots damp. Snow had crept in further than she remembered. On the floor near the fireplace, a trail of wet footprints shimmered faintly, as if someone barefoot had walked through her room during the night. But she was alone, wasn't she? Descending the staircase, Sophia noticed things she hadn't before. A child's shoe tucked beneath the grandfather clock, small handprints smeared in dust on the banister, and a portrait by the dining room, so faded it barely showed a face, but she could just make out a veil and eyes like shattered mirrors. The house was not empty. It remembered, and it watched. At breakfast, a meal she hadn't prepared, yet somehow waited for her. She found the letter again, folded neatly beside the tea. She hadn't left it there. Your inheritance is not gold, but memory. Look beyond the wood, listen to the snow, and do not enter room 7 unless she calls you by name. No signature, no seal. Sophia pressed her hand to the key around her neck, one she found mysteriously on her pillow upon waking, shaped like a skeletal finger. It didn't belong to any door she had found, but something told her it fit room 7. Later that afternoon, exploring the west wing, she found the ballroom. Its marble floors were cracked, the grand piano collapsed in dust. Long-forgotten instruments lay scattered like bones after a banquet, and in the center of the floor, beneath a stained glass chandelier, was a single wilted bouquet of white roses, rimmed in frost. A mirror still lined the walls, but in one, her reflection didn't match. Sophia stood still, her breath hot. In the mirror, her reflection wore a bridal veil. That night, the music returned, soft, sweet, and distant, like a ghost humming a forgotten lullaby. The piano, long ruined, now whispered keys into the silence, and from the hall, the faint sound of heels clicking on marble. Sophia sat up in bed. Room 7 remained shut, but the doorframe was wet with melting frost. She approached slowly, the key around her neck pulsing with cold. Her fingers trembled as they neared the lock. Click. The door opened on its own. own. Inside, the room was untouched by time. White lace curtains hung like cobwebs, a four-poster bed with velvet sheets, an armoire carved with roses, a cracked vanity mirror, and in the center, a bridal dress displayed like an offering, yellowed with age, its hem still dusted with snow. The air was sharp and bitter, colder than the rest of the house, and there on the floor were scratches, long, desperate lines gouged into the wood. Sophia stepped forward, and a whisper drifted through the room. He locked the door and never came back. The mirror across the room began to fog. Words appeared across the frost. Finish the dance. And then a veil dropped from the ceiling. It landed softly on Sophia's shoulders. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut. The candlelight died, replaced by the glow of blue frost seeping in through the cracks in the walls. From beneath the bed, a soft sobbing began. She backed away, heart hammering, and stumbled into the armoire. It creaked open. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, all addressed to Lord Dimitri, all signed Anastasia. Please forgive me. I only wanted to dance again. Why won't you open the door? It's so cold. You promised? Then the room fell silent. The mirror cleared, and for the briefest moment, Sophia saw her, a woman in a tattered bridal gown, standing directly behind her reflection, face hidden, fingers outstretched, and on her breath the final whisper. You look just like me. Veil clung to Sophia's shoulders like a second skin. It was cold, not fabric cold, but ancient, grief-soaked cold, as if it had been buried with someone and dragged out from the frozen ground. She tore it off and fled room 7. The door didn't close. It stayed wide open, groaning softly, invitingly. The air that filled out was thick with a scent of winter roses and something sour beneath it, like rotting silk. Sophia didn't sleep at night. Instead, she sat by the fire, eyes fixed on the key that had opened the cursed room, now resting on the table. It no longer looked silver. It was turning black. By morning, the manor had changed. The air was colder. The snow outside had crept up higher than it had the day before, though no storm had come, and the mirrors were all covered, every single one, blanketed in white sheets, every mirror except the one in room 7. Later, while searching the attic, Sophia discovered an old music box tucked inside a chest of broken frames and brittle lace. It was shaped like a ballerina's shoe, crusted with dust and ice. She turned the key, and it played a soft, haunting melody. She knew that melody. It was the same tune she had heard the night before, one the phantom piano played, and tucked beneath the box was a scrap of paper, almost too faded to read. Dance was meant for me, but he gave it to her. Back downstairs, the dining hall had a new guest. A chair was pulled out. A teacup had been filled, and beside it, resting carefully on the plate, was a frost-bitten finger bone, wrapped in a napkin embroidered with the letter A. Sophia dropped it and stumbled back. The bone shattered on impact, releasing a puff of fine snow. Something in the house was recreating her final days. She ran to the old library, hoping to find answers. The room smelled of mildew and candle wax. Thousands of books lined the curved walls, most untouched for a century. Behind a loose stone in the hearth, she found a bundle of letters, tied with a velvet ribbon, frozen stiff. She pried them open one by one. They were correspondence between Lord Dimitri and a woman named Lady Katerina. You must end it with Anastasia. Her blood is not noble. I will arrange the priest for our wedding on New Year's Eve. She's locked in her room. Do not worry. No one will hear her scream through the storm. Sophia's hands trembled. The man who built this manor had betrayed his bride, left her to die in the cold while he married another, and the snow had never stopped falling since. That night, Sophia returned to room 7. She didn't want to, but something in her bones pulled her back, as if each step wasn't her own. Inside, the dress was gone. In its place stood the figure. She was turned away, looking into the mirror. Her veil trailed along the floor like fog. Her arms were bone-thin, and her fingers scratched endlessly at her own reflection. Sophia froze. Then the figure spoke. He said he would come back. The voice was cracked, hollow, like wind passing through broken glass. Sophia tried to speak, but her lips would not part. The figure turned. No eyes, just two blackened sockets, leaking frost. Her mouth was sealed with ice, and her hands, bloodless and shaking, held the shattered remains of a wedding ring. Then, from the mirror behind her, a new voice echoed. Finish what he would not. The ghost stepped forward. Sophia fell to her knees, choking on the cold. Her breath came out in shards. Her fingers turned blue. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, the bride vanished. The veil dropped to the floor. In the mirror, Sophia saw herself again, but something was wrong. Her eyes weren't hers anymore. They were Anastasia's. The next morning, Sophia woke up with snow in her hair. She had no memory of falling asleep, let alone outside. Yet she was curled near the threshold of room 7, the veil resting beside her like a sleeping serpent. It was snowing inside the house. A thin layer of frost now covered the floorboards, creeping out from under the door. The hearths refused to light. The candles trembled, even when untouched. The house was breathing, and its breath was cold. In the hallway, etched into the frost on the window, was a message, written in a woman's cursive. Bring him back. Sophia stepped closer. The frost melted slightly under her breath, revealing another layer of script beneath. Before the clock strikes midnight. In desperation, Sophia sought out the only only local she'd met since arriving. Irina, the old groundskeeper who kept the gate keys. Irina lived in a crooked house near the edge of the forest. The walls were lined with talismans, mirrors turned inward, old books that whispered when the wind blew just right. When Sophia told her what was happening, Irina grew silent. Then she poured a glass of honey wine and whispered, "You should have left the past buried." Irina told her the legend, how Anastasia Volkov, the first bride of Lord Dmitri, vanished on her wedding night. A snowstorm buried the estate for 3 days straight, no sign of the groom until spring. He claimed she ran, but the villagers knew. They saw the blood on his boots. They heard the screaming through the storm. Worst of all, they found her ring, half buried in the ice, with a shattered note frozen beneath. "If I must be left to die, then let my death remain with you." No one ever found her body, but every year, on the anniversary of her death, the manor turned white and someone disappeared. Sophia returned to the manor shaken. At dusk, she walked the halls and noticed portraits changing. The painting of Lord Dmitri now showed a shadow behind him, a figure in a bridal gown slowly getting closer with each glance. The fireplace in the ballroom sparked to life on its own. Above it, a mirror cracked, and a voice came again, bidding him take his place. That night, room 7 was open again. Inside, the walls bled water. The old piano played itself, a sad, broken waltz that echoed through the ice-covered corridors. And on the bed lay a blackened wedding dress, its lace crawling like frozen vines. Sophia tried to leave. She packed her bag, rushed for the gates. The road had vanished. The forest was gone, replaced with an unending white field. No trees, no sound, just snow. The manor stood alone in a blizzard that wasn't real. And worse, she was not alone. Behind her, a trail of wet footprints followed her every step, but they were not hers. She returned to the dining hall and found a new place setting added. A card beside the plate read, "For the groom." In the reflection of her glass, she saw a man sitting at the head of the table. Tall, pale, dressed in a black suit. His face was wrong, blurred, stretched, like a forgotten memory trying to remember itself. Then she blinked, and he was gone. That night, Sophia stood in front of the mirror in room 7. She held the veil in one hand, the frostbitten ring in the other. She looked into her own eyes and whispered, "Who are you really?" The mirror cracked again, and her reflection smiled, even though she didn't. The manor no longer slept. Candles burned down to stubs and seconds. Clocks spun forward on their own. Windows iced over from the inside. Every surface pulsed with the memory of something cruel, as if the house was remembering too fast, too much. Sophia wandered through it like a ghost herself, caught between centuries. In the grand library, a room she hadn't entered before, she found old guest ledgers, names signed in ink long dried to rust. Several entries, all on the same date, March 3rd, 1893, were scratched over violently, gouged with a blade. The last one remained half visible. A. Volkov, bride of Dmitri Volkov. In the margins was a drawing, a crude sketch of a woman screaming, her veil blowing backward as if in a storm. Below it, she walked the aisle still. That night, Sophia followed the music. It began softly, the same broken waltz from before, echoing from the ballroom. But this time, it was joined by something else. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming closer. When she reached the ballroom, the chandeliers were ablaze. Dozens of chairs had been set up, draped in rotted lace. A single aisle, slick with melting frost, ran between them. At the end stood a figure in a tattered bridal gown. She didn't move, not at first. Then the gramophone clicked and the march began again. The figure turned, her veil soaked in ice, her face hidden, and began walking toward Sophia. Sophia fled, her breath fogged before her in the halls, chased by cold that sank into the bones. She locked herself in a small servant's room, lighting candles in a shaking hand. From under the door, a shadow passed, then a soft knock, then a whisper. Finish what he began. She found the attic door open in the morning. Inside, a wedding gown hung from a rusted hook. Beneath it, a child's drawing was pinned to the wall. In shaky crayon, it showed a man pushing a woman into snow, her hand outstretched, her mouth wide. The child had drawn himself watching, crying. Written underneath, "Mama went away. Papa said she froze because she was bad." Sophia stared at the name in the corner. D. Volkov, age 6. The truth took shape like frost on glass. Lord Dmitri had not been a grieving widower. He was a killer, a coward who murdered his bride and buried the truth in charm and money. The house had witnessed everything. The storm, the betrayal, the broken vows, and it never forgot. Neither did Anastasia. That night, Sophia stood before room 7 again. Inside, the veil floated midair, suspended in silence. The piano began playing once more, each note sharper than the last. Then came the vision. The walls faded, revealing the blizzard outside. A woman in white crawled through the snow, blood trailing behind her. Her fingers dug into the ice, nails broken. She looked up and saw Sophia, her eyes locked, and Sophia understood. She wasn't just seeing the past. She was reliving it. In a burst of cold wind, Sophia was thrown back from the door. Her hands were burning. Frostbite loomed across her palms. She crawled down the hall, turning to see the veil slowly drifting after her, like a predator in water. Back in her room, room, she collapsed. She could no longer feel her legs. The cold had taken root inside her, and still a voice sang from the walls. There will be a wedding, there will be a bride, and there will be a price. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, footsteps began again, slow, rhythmic, like a bride walking down the aisle, and this time she would not be left waiting. Sophia could barely stand. The cold was no longer around her, it was within her. Her skin had turned pale, lips tinged blue, but the true frost was behind her eyes, in the things she had seen, or remembered, because that was the truth, wasn't it? This house was remembering through her. She awoke the next morning to scratches on her bedroom mirror. Not cracks, scratches, as if a nail had carved them. She is not buried, she is waiting. Below it a shape had been etched, a tree, twisted and leafless, roots spreading like veins, the same tree from the portrait in the entry hall. Sophia knew where it was. Outside, past the rotted fence, half consumed by the forest, stood the hanging tree. Locals had once used it for executions during the time of the czars. Its bark was thick as iron, its trunk scarred by hundreds of names, all carved by hand. She approached with dread, the snow groaning beneath her, and there it was, at the base of the tree, a broken cross, barely visible beneath ice, scraped across the wood. AV 1893, the Forgotten Bride. Sophia dropped to her knees. The ground felt thinner here, hollow. She began to dig. An hour later, her frozen fingers struck claw, wrapped around bound bones. A woman's bones, delicate, brittle, and clutched around a withered bouquet of dead winter flowers. There was no casket. She had been thrown into the earth like an animal, and that veil, that cursed veil, now fluttered down from the sky, falling into the grave like snow. Sophia stood and screamed. For the first time, the forest screamed back. Back inside the manor, the rooms had changed. The candles were all lit, the carpets were clean. Music played from the gramophone, soft and elegant. It was March 3rd, 1893 once again. The manor was reliving the night of the wedding, and Sophia was trapped inside the memory. She descended the stairs to find the ballroom aglow with ghostly guests, flickering silhouettes, clapping, dancing, toasting champagne that no longer existed. And at the end of the aisle, Lord Dmitri Volkov, young, smiling, dressed in black. He extended his hand. "Anastasia," he said softly, "my beloved." Sophia stepped forward, not of her own will. She was being puppeted, as if the house demanded she complete the ceremony that was never finished. And from the staircase above, the real bride watched. Anastasia's ghost stood beneath a rotted veil, her face now fully revealed, pale skin tight over bones, eyes hollow yet gleaming with fury. She began to descend the steps. The music twisted, guests turned, mouths melted into screams. The illusion of joy crumbled. Dmitri turned too late. Anastasia walked directly through Sophia, seizing her murderer. Her fingers closed around his throat, and the air turned to frost. The ghostly guests backed away in terror as Dmitri began to wither, his skin turning black with cold. "You left me there," Anastasia whispered, "but I found my way back." With one final shriek, she drove him through the ballroom doors. They burst open, and beyond them was the blizzard, the same one that had killed her. He screamed as he was pulled into it, flailing against invisible winds. The veil followed, wrapping around him like a noose. And then, silence. The manor was empty once more. No music, no laughter, no veil. Just Sophia, collapsed on the floor, her breath fogging gently in the air. The temperature began to rise. For the first time, the manor felt warm, but Sophia knew better. This was not an ending. It was an invitation. The manor was quiet again, but silence, Sophia had learned, was never empty. It had weight, shape, even intention. She stood at the ballroom doors, staring at the place where Dmitri's spirit had been torn into the storm, now just a curtain of melting frost on old wood. But even though the ghostly groom was gone, something felt unfinished. There was still a name whispering in the dark. Anastasia. Sophia returned to the grave, this time not to dig, but to listen. She knelt beside the withered bouquet in the shallow pit and pressed her palm to the frozen earth. For a moment, nothing. Then a vibration, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. Something beneath her was alive. She looked around, realizing something terrible. The tree, it's not where she died, it's where she was buried to contain her. A root, black, pulsing slightly, curled out from the grave and began to reach across the snow. Sophia stumbled back. She now understood. Anastasia was never freed. She was bound to the land, and that bond was growing. That night, the snow fell harder, not from the sky, but from the ceiling. White ash, cold and soft, began to drift down the halls of the manor like snowfall. When Sophia touched it, it smeared across her fingers like powdered bone. And then came the voices, children's voices, crying, singing, whispering in Russian, their words unintelligible, but their pain clear. She followed the sound to the attic. The door creaked open on its own. Inside was a nursery, abandoned, untouched for over a century. 5 cribs, all empty. But carved into the wall behind them, barely visible beneath cobwebs, were names, female names, different from those in the family archive. Lida, Natalia, Irina, Sophia, and at the center, Anastasia. She wasn't the bride of Dmitri, she was his half-sister, one the family had hidden, a bastard child, raised in secret, locked away in this attic, and then offered as a bride to a nobleman to erase the shame, only to be left in the snow when he changed his mind. Sophia trembled. Her entire understanding of the ghost collapsed. Anastasia hadn't simply been betrayed, she'd been sacrificed. A woman made invisible, then punished for existing. The veil, the wedding, the grave, all symbols of that erasure. But now she was taking her story back. The temperature dropped again, and the veil returned. It came slithering down the stairs like a serpent, dragging a trail of frost behind it. But this time, it wasn't hunting, it was offering. It wrapped around Sophia's arm like a ribbon, and she felt her pulse slow. Then came the vision. She saw the final night. Anastasia weeping in her wedding dress, alone in the woods, snow falling. Dmitri's men watching silently as she begged. One man cried, a young servant, barely 18. He wanted to help her, but the order had been given. Leave her. If she lives, she'll shame the family. They rode off, but the servant looked back. He carved the tree. He left the flowers, and he whispered a vow into the snow. You will not be forgotten, not by me. Sophia opened her eyes. That servant, his name had never been recorded, but his blood still ran in the village. The Volkov family line didn't end with Dmitri. It lived on, and the debt was still unpaid. The veil tightened on her arm, not to hurt, to bind. Sophia was the last link, the last Volkov. She was the one who could end the curse, or let it spread. And the ghost bride was waiting for her choice. Sophia could barely sleep. The veil was no longer just fabric. It pulsed like skin now, and when she tried to remove it, it clung like it breathed. She stayed awake in the firelit drawing room, poring over old diaries and family letters. One brittle page fell loose from the back of a ledger, unsigned, yellowed, and clearly hidden. Its words were written in a tight, frantic scrawl. She was not of noble birth, but we made her one. We took a name, a title, and placed it upon her shoulders, like a crown made of ice. When she screamed, the snow grew louder. It was Dmitri's handwriting. He'd written it just days after the wedding, or rather, the abandonment. We buried our shame in the snow and expected it to melt, but snow remembers. That same night, the wind returned, but it didn't howl through the trees. It cried, like a woman calling from the edges of the estate. It repeated one word again and again, soft as a lullaby. Justice. Sophia lit a lantern and followed the voice. The veil guided her down, deep under the manor, to a door she had never noticed before, hidden behind a crumbling wine rack in the cellar. A keyhole, shaped like a rose. She didn't need to search for the key. The pendant she'd worn since childhood, passed down through her family, clicked in effortlessly. The door opened with a breath of cold so sharp it felt like teeth. A forgotten chapel lay beneath the estate. Its pews were broken, candles melted into bone, and at the altar stood a statue, Anastasia in her wedding dress, carved in exquisite detail, hands folded in eternal mourning. But at her feet lay something worse, a ledger written in red ink with columns of names and dates. Sophia turned the pages. It was a register of the family's wrongdoings, not just to Anastasia, but generations of cover-ups, blackmail, and banishments. Dmitri's crime wasn't a one-time tragedy. It was the first of many. The Volkov family had become nobility on the ruins of the forgotten, and now the forgotten were rising. Suddenly, the statue's eyes began to bleed. Thin trails of crimson ran down its marble cheeks. Not paint, not illusion, real blood. And as the first drop hit the stone floor, the veil around Sophia's wrist tightened violently, lifting her arm to the altar. She saw visions, not just of the past, but of what was coming. The snow consuming the village, the manor collapsing in screams, faces of the descendants crying out as ice spread over their hearts, and in the center, Anastasia, with no eyes, no voice, only grief sharpened into rage. The bride did not want peace, she wanted reckoning. Sophia fell to her knees. The ghost was not asking her to break the curse, she was part of it. The veil wasn't binding her to protect her family, it was binding her to be the final sacrifice. The last Volkov must suffer as I did. The floor beneath the altar began to crack open, and through it fingers of ice emerged. They were feminine, long, and laced with rings. The bride was rising. Sophia acted quickly. She reached into the statue's chest, where the heart had been carved out. Buried deep inside was a dagger, an old ritual blade, silver-edged and bone-handled. She heard Anastasia's voice again, but this time not in Russian. It was her own voice, distorted. Will you carry the burden, or end the bloodline? Sophia held the dagger to her palm. A single cut and she could offer herself. The curse would be fed. The snow would fall one last time, then sleep. But was that justice, or just another silencing? She stood up, breathing heavily, eyes fixed on the altar, veil fluttering like wings around her, and she whispered, you won't be buried again, but I won't be either. The ghost paused, the fingers stilled, the veil loosened. Anastasia was listening. listening, but she was not yet forgiving. The wind that rose from the chapel's cracked floor was colder than any natural winter. It wasn't just air, it carried voices, whispers layered atop whispers, all repeating the same thing. She waits in white. Sophia clutched the ritual dagger tightly. Blood from her earlier cut had dried on her palm, leaving her hands stiff and aching. But the pain was grounding, something real, something human, in a place where reality had unraveled. The statue of Anastasia had begun to fracture. From the eyes downward, thin cracks spread like veins through the marble. A faint light bled from within, not warm, but silver, flickering like frost on fire. The ice-covered fingers emerging from the ground reached further now, forming the vague shape of a woman, not whole, not solid, a form between worlds. Her wedding gown trailed behind her like smoke, her face still hidden beneath a frostbitten veil. And then she spoke, not through mouth or breath, but directly into Sophia's mind. You wear the veil, you carry the blood. What will you do with it? Sophia stood still, her voice low but steady. I didn't abandon you. I didn't betray you. No, but your name was carved from my ruin. The truth settled like snow in Sophia's chest. She wasn't just part of the Volkov line, she was the result of its betrayal. A descendant born from the remarriage Dmitri forged after abandoning Anastasia. Every luxury, every stone in the Volkov estate had been paid for in cold silence. I will not lie for them, she whispered. I won't let them turn me into another bride buried beneath snow. Anastasia's head tilted. The lights in the chapel flickered. The veil on Sophia's wrist began to unravel, slowly, as if letting go or preparing to bind tighter. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a deep, earthly sound. Footsteps, heavy boots on stone. Father Mikhail burst into the hidden chapel, lantern in one hand, crucifix in the other. Miss Volkov, by God, get back. That spirit means to destroy you. Sophia turned, her eyes wide. You shouldn't be here. But it was too late. Father Mikhail began reciting Latin rites, holding the cross high as the ghost's form began to twist and contort in the shadows. The air turned sharp, like knives scraping across stone, and the walls began to weep ice. Anastasia screamed, not in pain, but in betrayal. Another man speaks for her. Another man silences her. Again, the chapel exploded into movement. Candles shattered. Benches split down the middle. Frost raced across the floor, swallowing Mikhail's feet in ice. He dropped the crucifix as his hands blistered from cold. Sophia moved fast. She grabbed the fallen crucifix and used the metal to reflect the altar's flame toward the icy ground. A burst of steam hissed, freeing Mikhail's feet just long enough for him to stumble back. But Anastasia's form surged forward, her hands no longer graceful, clawed, broken, twisted by grief. She reached for the priest. Let her speak, or let him burn. Sophia stepped between them. Stop. Her voice echoed through the chapel like a thunderclap. She held out her bloody palm, the dagger in the other hand, and fell to her knees before Anastasia. I speak for you now, but not as a Volkov, not as a priest, as a woman who knows what it is to be silenced. The frost receded slightly. The air calmed, but the bride's veil fluttered like a heartbeat. From the broken wall of the chapel, a mirror emerged. Not glass, but polished ice. Sophia was drawn to it. Inside, she saw not herself, but Anastasia, moments before her death. She wasn't frozen in a crypt. She had been locked in her bridal chamber, left to starve and fade in the cold. No burial, no words, no closure, just forgotten. This is the truth they buried, Anastasia whispered. Now it will bury them. Sophia nodded slowly, then did what no Volkov had ever done. She carved the truth into the altar stone. Her blood, her voice, her rebellion. Anastasia Volkova, first bride, never forgiven. This house stands upon her grave. The veil released her completely, and the snow began to melt. Anastasia stepped back. Her face, now visible, was not a horror, but a wound made flesh. Her eyes met Sophia's, and for the first time in over a century, she smiled. Not warm, not cruel, but relieved. Then her form dissolved into snowflakes. The chapel fell silent. The curse was broken, or so Sophia thought. As they turned to leave, Father Mikhail whispered, shaken, "Why is the mirror still there?" They both turned, and in the icy glass, a new reflection appeared. Child, wearing a veil, watching. Reflection in the ice remained long after Anastasia had vanished. A child, no more than 9, stood motionless within the silver frost mirror, her veil too large, her eyes too hollow. She didn't blink, didn't breathe, just washed. Sophia felt her breath catch. That's not Anastasia. Father Mikhail moved beside her, his voice tight with dread. No, that's someone new. The chapel had gone still, but it wasn't over. Not truly. The curse had fractured, not broken, because the truth had awakened more than one ghost. That night, they returned to the estate. The storm had passed, but the air was colder than ever. Not a seasonal chill, chill. This was the kind of cold that settled in when something had been disturbed too deeply. In the guest room, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the edge of the veil that still lay draped across the floor like a discarded skin. She couldn't sleep. Behind her, the walls whispered, not words this time, but laughter, faint, childish, echoing like it came from inside the wood. She rose slowly and pressed her ear to the wall. Nothing. Then, single knock echoed from inside the wardrobe. She opened it, empty, except for an old bridal shoe, small, dusty, meant for a child. Downstairs, Father Mikhail pored over old Volkov records, pages crumbling, ink faded. Then he found it. A name struck through in red wax. Varya Volkova, age 9, bride candidate, 1894, deceased before bonding. No details, no burial, just erased. He called up to Sophia, voice shaking. There was another. After Anastasia, they tried again. Sophia felt it before he finished speaking. A hand, small and freezing, had wrapped around her wrist. She turned. Nothing there. But the mirror behind her fogged up slowly from the inside. Words began to form in the condensation. She got the cold. I got the silence. And then, scratched beneath the words, a date. Tomorrow. That night, Sophia didn't sleep. She sat in the great hall of the estate, candle in hand, eyes on the front door. Just after 3 a.m., the snow began to fall indoors. Flakes drifted through the ceiling like dust, landing silently on the stone floor. The candles flickered, and then, footsteps, tiny, barefoot, wet. A girl stepped into the candlelight, wearing a decaying bridal dress stitched from funeral cloth. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth sewn shut with black thread. Her hands, blue with frostbite, clutched a withered bouquet. She didn't walk. She glided. Behind her, the air warped, and other forms followed. Blurred faces of the forgotten brides, each one buried under the name of tradition. Each one a vow made and broken. Father Mikhail raised the crucifix again, but it melted in his hands this time, as if faith could not live here anymore. Sophia stood between the dead and the living. She looked at the girl. You are Varya. You were silenced. I see you. The girl tilted her head, blood running from beneath the black thread. Do you want a voice? Sophia asked softly. The girl extended her hand, not to harm, to ask. Sophia stepped forward, offering the veil that had once belonged to Anastasia. Not to bind you, but to free you. Varya took it, wrapped it around her small shoulders like a cloak, and then she screamed. The thread tore from her mouth in a spray of shadow. Her voice burst through the hall like shattered glass. All the windows exploded, all the mirrors cracked, and the house began to bleed snow. Outside, the estate groaned. The spirits began to rise, no longer bound in pain, but rising in vengeance. A snowstorm whipped into a frenzy, but within it, the figures danced. Not cruel, not evil, just free. Brides who had never spoken, girls who had never been named. They circled the estate one last time before turning to Sophia. A silent nod passed between them. Then they disappeared into the storm, their feet no longer bound to earth. Only Varya remained. She placed her cold hand on Sophia's cheek, smiled, and then turned to ash-white snow dissolving at her feet. By dawn, the estate was quiet. The frost was gone. The veil no longer in the house. The records had turned blank, as if the house itself had chosen to forget the pain it once protected. Father Mikhail left the next day. He would not speak of it again. Sophia remained, not out of fear but purpose. She restored the chapel, not to worship, but to remember. Each name etched into the wall. Anastasia, Varya, and the others never written. The mirror now stood in the chapel, cracked, but never covered, because the snow remembers, and so will she. Some brides walk the aisle, some walk the frost, but none should walk alone. This was the tale of the Frostbite Bride. A story not just of spirits, but of silenced voices, and a cold that carries names the living try to forget. Until next time, keep your candles lit, and never ignore the sound of bare feet in the snow. Keep watching my all videos, and subscribe my channel.